Okay, so probably by now you've heard about the apparent overheating issue on the Sony ZV-E1. So in today's video, we're going to test out different frame rates and see like how long it takes to actually overheat this camera. But this isn't going to be just a test on overheating for this camera. We're actually going to be taking a look at the brand new product from Ulanzi. That is the Ulanzi Cooling Fan. I kind of just want to see how well this thing works, if it works at all. If my guesses are correct, I would say that this thing's probably going to do a really good job at keeping this camera completely cool, but we're going to have to test that out and kind of just see how well it works. All right, so before we get into the test, let's unbox this thing and see what actually comes with this thing. So when you open the box here, you'll see right away you have just a cable, you have the actual fan itself, and then if you remove to the bottom here, remove the foam stuff, you'll see that you're going to have a user manual, you're going to have some stickers. So what the sticker actually is you actually install it onto the back side of the camera, and this gives it a better surface for these little like suction cups that are on the back of the fan here to like stick to so it doesn't fall off easily. So looking at the fan, you'll see on the back that you have an on and off button. That on and off button actually does also have two different mode selections. So you have mode 1 and you have mode 2. All that's really going to do is just change the speed of the fan. So how this actually works is once you get that sticker on the back side of the body, this thing just has suction cups. So all you have to do is just install it onto the back. I personally get them a little wet first because that'll make them stick better. And then you just kind of push it on and now it's on the camera. Now you can have the mode button 1 and 2. Mode 1 is a lower speed on the fan and mode 2 is a higher speed on the fan. So if you also look here, there's an LED display on the back. What that's actually going to show you is your battery life, your mode selections, and it's also going to show you the temperature of the camera because there's actually a temperature sensor on the back side of this fan. And that right there is what is really cool about this fan. So you can physically see when this camera is actually starting to get hot, and you can physically see where it actually plateaus when the fan is on. All right, so how we're going to do this test here is I'm going to start with 4K 24 frames per second without the fan and just see how long it'll go before it shuts off. I'm going to be shooting in this mode because specifically this is the mode that I shoot in all the time. I always shoot in 4K 24 frames per second. So for me, I want to know if this camera is going to last a long time or if it's going to shut off in that mode. After that test, we're going to check out 4K 30. And then after that, we're going to check out 4K 60. So when you see other people's videos talking about how the Sony ZV-E1 overheats, I can almost guarantee you that every single one of those people have been testing that in 4K 60. So 4K 60 on this camera is going to be running the highest bit rate. It's going to be running the most frame rates. So it's going to be giving this camera a lot more work than 4K 24. So I do expect 4K 60 to have lesser of a time before it does overheat or shuts off. But the only thing that I don't really understand why everyone tests this camera in 4K 60 is that I rarely ever shoot in 4K 60, especially for hour-long stretches. Like 4K 60 for me is only used for slow motion, and I'm usually only getting bits and pieces, little clips here and there, nothing long. So 4K 60 is kind of a dumb test for me because realistically, I'm never going to do a long shoot in 4K 60. Unless you're like shooting like basketball games where you want that slow motion at any given time. That's realistically the only reason I could see why you would want to shoot in like those higher frame rates for long periods of time. But chances are if you bought this camera, you bought this to do content creation and like vlogging. So I don't think you're going to be shooting like 3-hour-long basketball games. All right, so just to make this a fair comparison, I'm going to take off this cage that's on the camera. We're going to take the fan off. I'm going to take the microphone off, and I'm going to put it on this very small base just to lift it a little bit off the ground so that you're getting some air movement underneath the camera as well. Because most likely you're always going to have this thing on like a tripod or something off the ground. When you set it completely flat on a surface, it doesn't allow it to have any air movement or breathing, so it will probably overheat longer. So we're just going to put this little base on there to get it a little bit off the ground. All right, so let's check out how long the 4K 24 lasts before it actually shuts down and overheats. All right, so just like I assumed that 4K 24 frames per second had absolutely zero overheating issues, it went all the way until the battery died. So for me, that's a pretty big win. And that's another reason why I would recommend shooting in 4K 24 frames per second. It's going to be the least taxing on the heating of this camera. So if you're planning on using this camera to shoot like talking head videos like this one right here, this camera should give you absolutely zero problems whatsoever. Now I will say if you are using like a dummy batteries do heat up a little bit more, so you might have some effect from a dummy battery. But we're not testing that today. We're going to be testing just the batteries itself because I just want to see how well this camera does with the stock battery and not any other dummy battery or USB. So moving on to the next test, we're going to check out 4K 30 frames per second. This is going to be the one I'm really intrigued about because if you're doing like things like live streams, you're probably shooting in like 30 frames per second. Maybe you're shooting in 1080 and then you probably won't have any issues at all. But in 4K 30 frames per second, that's what I have shot in the past doing live streams. So this one's going to be kind of interesting for me as well. All right, so let's check out how long the 30 frames per second lasts before it overheats or the battery dies. All right, so that test actually kind of surprised me a little bit. I actually kind of assumed that was going to overheat maybe a little earlier. I did see that warning sign first came on at about an hour and 30 minutes. It blinked for a little bit, then it kind of shut off, and then it came back at an hour and 50 minutes. But then it kind of stayed on from hour 50 minutes all the way to 2 hours and 14 minutes. And then it actually overheated at 2 hours and 14 minutes. And it had like 3 or 4% battery life on it when it died. So I think if you're shooting 4K 30 and you're under 2 hours of filming, you're going to be totally fine. If you are live streaming, you will be plugging in that USB-C, which could add maybe a little bit more heat to it. But maybe having the door open too might help a little bit as well. So, all right, so now let's check out 4K 60, just see how that does. See if it's going to overheat way earlier. I kind of expect this one to go maybe like an hour, hour and a half tops before it dies. If we can get longer out of that, that'd be awesome. But let's just see what it does. All right, so 4K 60 did pretty much what I expected it to do. It went for an hour and 5 minutes, and that heat warning sign first appeared at 53 minutes. So once that light came on, it lasted 12 more minutes before it actually overheated and shut off. All right, so now we're gonna check out the Ulanzi Cooling Fan and see if this thing actually makes any difference. I pretty much expect this thing to make a difference because I know this is going to pull the heat away from the camera, so I think this is actually gonna be a pretty big help. All right, so as far as testing the fan on the camera, we're gonna skip the 24 frames per second and the 30 frames per second because we know that that camera can last until the battery dies. 60 is what we're looking for on this. So we're gonna see if this is going to make a difference. I would actually kind of guess that this thing might add another half hour, maybe more, depending on how long the battery lasts on this. So for the first test, we're gonna put this on the back of the camera. We're not gonna have any external battery connected to this. We're just gonna let it run. Once this dies, we're gonna just see how long the camera goes before it overheats. So let's check that one. All right, so we did add some time to that 4K 60. The unfortunate thing is that the fan actually died on the battery at 58 minutes, so it didn't do as good of a job. And in fact, using the fan right away probably wasn't the way to go because it was cold when we started the test. So we could have turned it on afterwards once it started to get hot, or maybe when the heat warning came on. But we did get to 128 minutes, so we did add some extra time onto that first test. And the heat light first came on at 120, so it lasted about 8 minutes before it shut off. All right, so for the next test, we're gonna take a power bank. We're gonna plug it into the actual fan itself so that it's got constant power. So this would be something if you're rigging out a camera and maybe you're doing production, this would be the thing you would use that for because it would be kind of weird to carry around a power bank and a fan. That's kind of why this thing is supposed to be a portable setup. So, but let's just see what it does when we do have that plugged in and see if we can get this thing all the way till the battery dies. Because I did notice that in that test, it did kind of stop at about 34 degrees Celsius and it kind of stayed there until the fan died. Then the thing just went up in heat and it died. So I'm expecting this to possibly go to the end of the battery. So let's check this out. All right, so just like I expected, that thing went all the way until the battery died. It had 0 heat warning lights. That thing did very well. So if you watch the gauge on the actual fan itself, it went up to about 34 Celsius, and then it just stayed there. it didn't go away from that. It just stayed at that temperature. So this fan was doing a very good job at pulling the heat off the camera and just keeping the camera going. So this does make an absolute difference. I mean, we more than doubled the time. We had, what, 2 hours and 10 minutes. So that is a very good job, and it would have probably kept going for a long time if I had a bigger battery in it and another SD card. But that SD card took 203 gigabytes, so we did a pretty good job with this thing, and I'd say you'd never have a reason where you're probably shooting that long of a time. So as far as the microphone on the camera, the onboard camera probably will pick up that fan sound, but if you're using like an external shotgun mic and it's pointing forward, it's not going to pick that up because it's behind the camera. So I think this is going to be a really cool thing. I would probably say that I wouldn't turn this thing on until you have heating issues, just because the battery life on it is only going to last an hour when it's on high. All right, so there's one more test I want to check out, and this is kind of one that I stumbled upon myself. And I think this is going to be maybe even just as good as the fan, and it's not going to cost you a dime. So we're going to take the fan off on this test, and all we're going to do is we're just going to open the doors on the side. We're going to open the SD card door, we're going to open the microphone door, and we're going to open the USB door. And on the other side, we're going to just let the battery door be open. So if you're on a tripod, it just doesn't matter because it's not going to affect anything. Now, I probably wouldn't walk around moving around with the battery door open because that could pop loose maybe. But I have a feeling that when you have the battery doors and the side doors open, this thing's probably not going to have any heating issues, and it's probably also going to go until the battery dies. There is actually one more thing that I forgot about at the beginning of the video. When you're shooting on this camera for long periods of time, make sure that you have the screen open on the camera. If you have the screen closed, where it's visible, that is trapping that heat against that back wall, because this is where the most heat comes from on the camera, is this and the battery. So always make sure the screen's open when you're shooting long periods of time. All right, so let's go check out this test to see if this thing actually can make it till the end of the battery. Okay, so 4K 60 with all the doors open, the battery door open, was a total success. It lasted 2 hours and 5 minutes, had zero issues, did not have any of the heat lights come on. The only thing is that I did test the temperature after the camera died. I put this on the back and turned on the temperature to see what it was at, and it was at about 45 degrees Celsius, so it definitely is hotter than it was with the fan, but it was still cool enough to where it didn't overheat. So if there's anything you learned from this video, maybe is if you don't want to buy this like $40 part, just open the doors on your camera and it's gonna probably work pretty good. Now, as far as the heat in this house, yes, this is a 75-degree house, so it's not super hot in here. I will say though, when I did take this in Orlando a couple months back, me and Paul Feinberg were shooting out in 100-degree temperatures all day, shooting at Universal Studios, shooting at some of the resorts, doing lots of 120 frames per second in S&Q. The camera was like super hot to a touch, but we never had one time where that heat light even came on, because normal people usually just shoot like small clips here and there, maybe shooting up to 5-10 minutes at tops. So if this thing can last in 100-degree temperature and never see the heat warning sign, I'm gonna just say like the whole overheating argument with this camera is pretty pointless to me. So unless you're shooting for like 1 or 2 hours in one take, you're not gonna have any issues with this camera. So would I recommend this now? If you have 40 bucks to spare and you want to not worry about overheating, absolutely go for it. This thing's it worked. We definitely proved that it lasted twice as long. Maybe it could have gone 5 times as long. Who knows? So if you're shooting in like productions and stuff, you want to put this on the back of your camera, I would definitely just say, yeah, go for it. You can power this into your V-mount system, and you know, it's not going to be an issue. You don't have audio usually on production cameras anyways, because you're usually using like secondary audio. So I would say, yes, get this thing 40 bucks. It works well. If anything, it's going to be one of those situations where if you do get into a situation and it starts overheating, pop that thing on, turn it on high, let it cool down for a little bit, and it's going to be good to go. So, but if you don't want to spend money, just open the doors on your camera and it'll be good. So, but anyways, guys, if you have any questions about this Ulanzi cooling fan, please leave me a comment down below. If this video has been any help in any way, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to follow along to any other Sony ZV-E1 content or just other Sony cameras as well. And as always, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. I also like to thank ET. You guys, I don't know if you guys actually saw it, but this is the drunk ET from the movie. So yeah, we'll catch you on the next one, guys. Later.